We're gonna talk about comics from Devil's Due. It's something you wondered if Talking Joe would ever do. I guess we'll explain it all to you. Gonna take some time to read the books we've never read. Oh.
Hey, it's me, Mark, and welcome to Talking Joe, the G.I. Joe comics podcast. Now, today we will be looking at the 48-page special, G.I. Joe Cobra Reborn, from Devil's Due, January 2004. But I will not be doing that thing alone. As always, I will be joined by my co-host. It's a real American Tim. It's Tim Finn.
Hello, listeners and viewers. And Mark, this is not an episode where we're talking about a new comic book. We are talking about a comic book from 2004. Well, okay, the cover date says January 2004, so surely this came out in November 2003.
I think back in these days, I think in those days they actually dated it for the date that it came out.
Oh, okay.
Because it's not like an instruction to the
newsstand.
Yeah, so this is when you should pull it. Yeah.
Right.
So while we're sharing our copies, my copy is in my collected G.I. Joe Reloaded custom bound hardcover, which contains G.I. Joe Reborn, Cobra Reborn, and the full 14-issue G.I. Joe Reloaded. So this is what kicked it all off.
This comic, or you mean this had something to do with...
This comic kicked off this foray into an alternate G.I. Joe universe that I collected in my custom bound book.
In the back of this comic, Cobra Reborn, for a house ad for Devil's Due issue 27, on the bottom it says, coming February only from Devil's Due. So yes, I think I was wrong. I think the cover date in the indicia here does refer to the month of the release. Okay, so let's put this in context, Mark. Devil's Due was 2 years into its full monthly run of a G.I. Joe comic book that continued the Marvel continuity, but was going in its own direction. Josh Blaylock had written the opening story and
basically the first 25 issues. And you pointed to the issue 27 in the back of being advertised in the back of this book. So it's kind of being released simultaneously with issue 26. And it's interesting to note that this point where they're launching this new G.I. Joe continuity is also the start of the Brandon Jerwa run, where he picks up as the writer for a couple of years. And so it's going off in these two different directions in parallel. Josh Blaylock is stepping back from being the lead writer of the main run or the run that continues the Harmer continuity, with this new writer Brandon Jerwa taking over, and then they're launching this brand new continuity with the launch of this special. And you might remember when we talked to Brandon Jerwa, he was slightly taken aback by that it felt like maybe the lens of the focus of Devil's Due was sort of shifting a little bit more to hoping that this new continuity would be a soaring success, and possibly the existing one was potentially diminishing in importance.
For those of you who are sort of wondering where the Joe Casey run lands, right, which is G.I. Joe America's Elite, that comes 2 years later. We're not there yet. It hasn't been announced. It hasn't been conceived. The main Devil's Due run, which again in this month is on issue 26, is gonna run until issue 42 or 44, and then relaunches as G.I. Joe America's Elite with a new writer, a new artist, and a smaller team and a tighter focus. And so
It's maybe worth sort of putting it in Talking Joe context as well. So in this Talking Joe Disavowed series that we've been doing, we've been looking back at the Devil's Due era of G.I. Joe, which started in 2001 and ran for a good few years. I think it was until 2007, and we've been basically going, month by month through their release and covering it in great detail and talking to the creators as we've gone. And we sort of have covered the most of the grand sweep of that era, and we're sort of circling back and covering all of the little bits and pieces that we haven't covered. The largest component of which is this parallel universe, alternate universe of G.I. Joe Reloaded, G.I. Joe Reborn, that we're beginning to have a look at here.
So here's another comparison. When this was announced that there would be a new monthly series, Mark, you may have some specific language from the time, from a press release.
Yeah, I've got a synopsis which says, "Forget everything you know about this nest of vipers. Acclaimed writer Paul Jenkins tackles the never-before-told origin of the deadly Cobra organization." So it's a brand new continuity, 14 issues with 2 specials, with this kicking it off into 2004. And at the time, Blaylock sort of spoke about this relaunch. He said, we're launching an all-new G.I. Joe series, allowing even a complete newcomer to G.I. Joe to jump on with ease. So it's a bit of a... It's a bit of a place where a newcomer can join the G.I. Joe book, much like we saw with Skybound relatively recently, where they're starting off with a brand new continuity, because G.I. Joe was saddled with a not quite the 40-year plus continuity that we had then, but still a good, it had the Marvel continuity and then the building block of 20 plus issues and more from Devil's Due at this point. So jumping on point, don't need to know too much going into it. And he went on to say, and this is from a Comic Book Resources interview, "When we went solo from Image, we needed a big event, starting the continuity from scratch, set aside from regular series, was something that I wanted to do for a long time, and it seemed like the perfect time to jump on it. When we first got the license, that was the question: rewrite the continuity or start at where the old series left off. I felt at the time that there were so many unanswered questions that fans would want to explore them some more. We've had 2 years to do that and continue to do so in the ongoing series. But it's time for a series that your teenage brother, or heck, even your dad, could pick up and read without knowing who the characters are. A fresh take on old favourites, moving the book away from that 80s tag and into 2004, the distant future, with a top-notch stories to boot. That fresh take is entitled G.I. Joe Reloaded, and with the first specials trickling out, Blaylock has a good hold on how this group of superpowered troops is more realistic. He goes on to say, I'd say it's more grounded. Much credit of that is to John Ryber, who goes on to write the rest, the next special and the start of the main ongoing series, who has done more military research for this than I've ever seen anyone do. This guy tries to make sure that even the Pentagon security procedures are right so a character can walk down the hall. It's just great, incredible story. I feel like I'm getting the live action movie I've always wanted as a kid. So what we're, I guess, getting a taste of there is the jumping on points. Anyone can start. It's a couple of years in. Maybe interest is waning a little bit. Sales are slightly dipping. Need to inject some energy. It's sort of having a cake and eating it, of having the ongoing Marvel continuity plus a brand new continuity, and it's trying to inject, I guess, a bit more adultness, realism, and I guess movie sensibilities in there as well. It's the flavors that I'm getting from what Blaylock was saying there.
Okay, so let me add a bunch of stuff in there. Right at the beginning of that Comic Book Resources quote from Blaylock, you mentioned leaving Image, and it's actually covered in the Devil's Due news page in the back of this comic book, if you want to go full screen on me, right? So Devil's Due leaves Image, effective January 2004, aka this month. Commander-in-Chief Josh Blaylock is returning Devil's Due Publishing to its, there's an apostrophe there, but there shouldn't be, because that would mean it is, to its totally independent roots. What does that mean for fans? Nada. So when Devil's Due gets the G.I. Joe license in 2000 and 2001, and G.I. Joe launches in 2000, it's published by Image. 2 years later, Blaylock surprises everyone by leaving Image, and I think slightly annoying Image in the process. And so that's when there no longer is the Image eye on the top corner of G.I. Joe, and there is instead the Devil's Due logo. And it's funny because sometimes now people say to me like, oh, this has happened twice. This does not happen a lot. Do you have the Image G.I. Joe? And I assume they're talking about Skybound Image, and they actually mean Devil's Due. And I think of the Devil's Due G.I. Joe as published by Devil's Due because for 5 years it was, but for 2 years before that it was published by Image. Okay, so that's 1 point. 2, you just said, Mark, that this feels a little bit sort of influenced by or looking toward movies. Like this is going to be more serious. Maybe, the G word is tough, grounded, because, how grounded is any G.I. Joe story? I remember at the time, the talk was this was Ultimate G.I. Joe. That the same way that in 2000, Marvel had created a pocket continuity of 2 and then 3 and then 4 monthly series, which was a new universe that started in 2000, right? It was too much, there was too much baggage that in 1999 and 2000, Peter Parker was 29 years old and he was married to a supermodel. That's no longer something that kids understand, right? He's not a loser 15-year-old who's got problems. And so the idea was to start Spider-Man over, but not replace the existing one. And then the same thing with X-Men, and then the Avengers, which was the Ultimates, and then Fantastic Four, and lots of others. And that was a big hit, and Marvel made a big push with a different trade dress and some surprise writers and some very exciting and hot art. And in the case of Spider-Man, some very reliable art from the guy who had already been drawing Spider-Man. So as soon as this, I don't want to say rumor, but sort of buzz or talk on the internet of Devil's Due was going to start G.I. Joe over, I think there was a little bit of confusion, like, oh, are they canceling G.I. Joe? And this may have just been 1 or 2 people asking this question on a discussion board. I don't think this was a giant wave of concern, and I don't think it lasted very long. But 1 or 2 people out there at least thought that the monthly comic was ending and being replaced by Ultimate G.I. Joe. But the idea, the feeling was, my recollection was that not only would this be a new continuity that you could start fresh on, it would be more realistic and, faster. And then because I don't think Devil's Due was using the word ultimate as a comparison, but maybe everyone else was, the same way that the Ultimate comics at Marvel in 2000 and 2001 made regular Marvel look confusing and stodgy, that this might be the same for G.I. Joe. And here's just one more comparison. Jesse Farrell, the manager at my comic book store, has occasionally told me this interesting anecdote that when Kurt Busiek was writing Avengers in 2000 and 2001, right? And that was the series that had relaunched as Heroes Reborn. And that was a big push for Avengers, that he sort of saw the writing on the wall when the Ultimates became the talk of the town and Marvel's most exciting book, because that was an Avengers book, but that had a lot more excitement and sales. And I don't know exactly how this sentence ends, but Busiek knew that either he would leave Avengers soon, or that he might be replaced on Avengers soon, or Avengers might need to become more like the Ultimates, and maybe that's not what he wanted to do. It's one of those 3 things. And so here's this context that Devil's Due is already doing a G.I. Joe, which in 2001, when it launches, was really popular, right? We've established that it was the number 2 selling comic of that month, beaten out by a Wolverine's Origin. And 2 years later, at issue, 25, 26, 27, Devil's Due G.I. Joe has sales have declined. And so I think some of this is definitely that Blaylock wants to tell a new story. And some of this is about goosing sales and getting eyeballs. And one of the ways you do that is with a surprise writer. And Paul Jenkins is British, right?
Yeah, and I believe he grew up in England and moved across to the States as a young adult to I think initially work with Mirage Studios. But yeah, Paul Jenkins, here's the hot writer joining the title, and the nice little bit of synchronicity is, as you were alluding to, it when G.I. Joe issue number 1 launched, it was sort of beaten out to the top spot of the most successful selling issue of the month by Wolverine Origins, written by Paul Jenkins, who returns to this story to launch it. So I do wonder if there was a little bit of that in Blaylock's mind when he was trying to put the team together.
I want to say one more thing about Paul Jenkins. By the time this G.I. Joe Cobra Reborn special was released, Jenkins had already now written 2 or 3 years of Spider-Man. This was the title that at the time in like 2002, 2003 was, I think, the adjectiveless Spider-Man. Some issues initially drawn by, I think, like Joe Bennett and maybe even Sean Phillips, and then Humberto Ramos. And that run of issues is great and is not in print right now. Ooh. It's great. And then when there was, I think the second Spider-Man movie, the Sam Raimi Spider-Man movie, that series was relaunched as a monthly spectacular Spider-Man, which Humberto Ramos drew, and I feel like it wasn't quite as special, even though it was the same writer and the same artist and sort of the same title. Anyway, so if you're wondering who Paul Jenkins is, everyone, he had just been writing a bunch of stuff for Marvel.
Mm-hmm. And also he had a very long run on Hellblazer for DC, so there's a little bit of grittiness and griminess in terms of that what that title represents, and potentially some of that coming across into potentially the likes of this book.
This comic is mostly penciled by Eddie Barrows, who in 2004 was not on my radar. Maybe you have looked into, before we recorded this episode, what he was doing before this comic. I will say that right now in 2025, he's been drawing some really amazing Superman comics for DC. He did 3 issues of Action Comics during the Superstars sort of storyline event, which wasn't quite a story. And he just did 2 or 3 issues of the regular monthly Superman in between Dan Mora issues in the Joshua Williamson run. And there is a lot of Neil Adams in his art now in terms of his rendering and his physiques. But back in 2004, he's more at the beginning of his career.
And was coming off the back of some work on other G.I. Joe work for Devil's Due, including on G.I. Joe Frontline. He did pencils for the Brandon Joe Chuckles storyline that he worked on, for example.
And this is a place where immediately Cobra Reborn and G.I. Joe Reloaded, as a sort of ultimate G.I. Joe relaunch for me in 2004, stumbled, because you don't have to have artists who have never drawn G.I. Joe, but you have a writer who's never written G.I. Joe, and you have someone who did just do some, quote, regular G.I. Joe comics, and they were good, but this book now looks just like the other book. And, they've got this Timothy Bradstreet cover, which we'll talk about in a minute, which, this was the first piece of G.I. Joe art that he had done, and it looks very different from all the Marvel covers and thus far all the Devil's Due covers. And so The outside looks very different. The title is different. The fact that this new continuity starts with a Cobra special and not a regular issue 1 and not a G.I. Joe special, right? Although they're trying to have it both ways because it's the Cobra Reborn special, right? But Cobra's on the bottom and G.I. Joe is on the top. So, but anyway, Eddie Barrows does an okay job on this comic, but it was not different enough, and I think at the time for me, great enough to be as special as Devil's Due made it seem like it was going to be. And then also there are 2 credited assistant pencilers, which, maybe they do backgrounds or maybe they drew like randomly page 26 and 32. But you can see that this is maybe not the highest budgeted project at Devil's Due. Maybe they spent all their money on the writer and the cover artist.
and the parallels back to Marvel, who were sort of making a bit of a splash at this time with their new universes and their relaunches with Marvel Knights as well as with the Ultimate Universe. They were, in terms of their artists particularly, they were sort of a bit more experimental with maybe the writers, but certainly with the artists, they were really throwing their top tier talent like that, like Joe Quesada or Steve Dillon or the Kubert brothers or Chris Bacalo, Karari Andrews,
or
Michael Mark Bagley.
Michael Allred on X-Force, which became Ecstatics, that is both an excellent artist and also oddly experimental, right? Like that's the X-Force book that had been launched 100 issues earlier under Rob Liefeld, right? And then all of a sudden it becomes this weird experimental pop X-Men comic. Is this enough? Introduction?
Preamble?
Should we just get into the actual comic?
So on the credits, Paul Jenkins on story, Eddie Barrows on pencils with Renato Arlem and Moises de Masquendo. Jack Jackson is on inks with supports from Wellington Diaz and Andrew Pepoy. Link Studios and Transparency Digital on colors, Dreamer Design on letters, graphic design by Mike Norton. With that said, maybe let's take a look at the...
Let's have a look at the covers in the gallery.
This comic book came with 2 covers. There was the regular cover, which was a wraparound image drawn by Timothy Bradstreet. It is Cobra Commander in a new version of his costume with giant shoulder pads. And he's holding, let's say it's an Uzi. And his head is slightly leaning forward as he's leering at you. And in addition to the shoulder pads, his hood has a different treatment for the Cobra logo. It's no longer small and on his forehead. It's almost the size of his face, but moved up a little bit. And notably where his eyes are sort of peek out from the Cobra symbol. And then there's a different version of the Cobra symbol on his chest. So the Ron Rudat iconic Cobra symbol is on his mask. And then sort of like the Revenge of Cobra like animation symbol at the beginning of the 6th episode of G.I. Joe, a more stylized Cobra, right? It's on his chest. Cobra Commander is standing in front of a brushed aluminum wall with giant bolts in it, and behind him and to his right is a large open warehouse space. There's a bit of armaments all the way on the back cover underneath some text, which sort of looks like the ASP. That's the gun pod, right?
Yeah.
But you see sort of a curved, you see like giant bay doors behind him and a curved shape as if this is sort of a half tunnel and some duct work. So this Cobra Commander is either in a headquarters warehouse, he might be underground. And the sort of color scheme behind him is sort of gray and lavender. And there's a Photoshop filter here. I don't know what you call it in Photoshop, but it's sort of crunches down gradients into like 3 or 4 or 5 like flat but splotchy colors. And then insets on top of this image on the back cover are 3 what are supposed to look like photos, like security photos of Destro, Baroness, and Storm Shadow. Each one is in some crosshairs in sort of a green tone. And then next to each one is very, very small red type in sort of a digital font on a little black rectangle graphic with their code name and their name and locations they've been seen and quote, alleged offenses. And what's exciting about this, if you are a Tim Bradstreet fan, is that he gets models or actors for his photos. He lights them and then he takes photos and then he very, very faithfully redraws and I think to some extent traces and manipulates those photos. So his cover images, and he's known for a very long run of both Marvel Knights and Max, Marvel's mature readers in print, Punisher covers. His covers end up looking like movie stills because they are drawn from real people, right? And the lighting is all incredibly authentic. He's not exaggerating anything. He's not cartooning anything. And I think he's inventing nothing. He often lights his characters from above. So there are sort of shadows, under their brows, under their noses, under their lips. And what's exciting about this is that you have maybe never seen a Cobra Commander drawn this realistically, right? That looks like a real man wearing that hood. Same thing with Destro. That is a person, right? Tim Bradstreet found some guy and took a photo of him, but then drew a little bit on his forehead and sort of shined his head so that it's not just James McCullen, Caucasian Scottish guy. It's Destro wearing a metal mask. Same thing with Baroness. Same thing with Storm Shadow. And all of them are sort of looking over their shoulder to an extent. And Storm Shadow is very much a Japanese man with cool hair and cool sunglasses. He's not wearing a white 80s ninja costume. And so again, the Tim Bradstreet filter is realism. Like this could be maybe not the poster for a live action G.I. Joe movie, but the lobby cards, right? The publicity stills. And I had forgotten until I reread this comic for this episode, either how much this ended up influencing the first live action G.I. Joe movie, Rise of Cobra, or coincidentally happens to have some similarities in how Storm Shadow looks. Because you have this guy wearing a cool white costume with cool hair and cool sunglasses, not the Ron Rudat white ninja costume. And it starts with this cover. Oh, you were ready with an image. And, certainly like, we see this with Spider-Man movies and Star-Lord, right? Like Marvel characters are taking their masks off every 5 minutes so they can like deliver some dialogue, not like behind a mask or a CG helmet. So when there was going to be a live action G.I. Joe movie, I'm sure 4 out of 5 costume designers were going to put any version of Storm Shadow not in his like ninja mask for most of the movie. He would just put that on for one fight and you'd see a like interesting, handsome actor. But I take it, Mark, from that you having that photo at the ready, that publicity photo from the first live action movie, that you thought of this too?
Indeed, yeah. And also, now that you're sort of saying it as well, I'm also thinking about Cobra Commander as well, sort of being presented in the movies with those kind of long black leather jackets as well. Sort of is quite close to kind of the aesthetic of this particular image too.
I remember this. I'm just going to take a moment to talk about properties becoming movies. I remember in the 90s, there was some discussion, I think in Wizard magazine, of Stan Lee and a few Marvel people using Alex Ross's artwork from Marvels, right? Speaking of Kurt Busiek, I mean, actual issues, maybe panels or pages blown up, but you had this artist who was taking photos of models and painting in a really appealing photorealistic way all of these Marvel characters, but from a point of view that felt like, you're looking up at these larger than life characters, and yet they were real people. And that sort of finally, Stan Lee and a few other Marvel people had this Marvel artwork that they could pitch to Hollywood people, and they could say, this is what the movie would look like, right? Because if you hold up like a John Romita drawing of Spider-Man and you're like, this is what the movie would like, that's not what the movie would look like. That's a drawing by a person, right? That's not like a real person flying through the air whipping. And I remember my sense of when Hasbro was starting to feed imagery to producers and studio people for that first G.I. Joe movie, right? There was some Devil's Due comics, there was some Sigma 6 toys, I think, because of the accelerator suits, maybe. And I'm sure absolutely these first two Tim Bradstreet covers of the two Reborn specials of Snake Eyes, which we'll talk about in a future episode, and this Cobra Commander cover.
Yeah, here's a piece of G.I. Joe Retaliation concept art that I just looked up. You can see that the aesthetic there is definitely taking cues from this particular Cobra Commander. So, yeah, as you say, in terms of the scrapbook that they were looking back to for reference, I think it's fair to guess that this one was in that mix.
If you're listening and you didn't see that image, it looks like a watercolor painting. I don't know what it is, but it basically just looks like someone made a costume based on this Tim Bradstreet drawing. The blue is very, very dark. The red is very, very dark. It's definitely leather. This is not like the 1982 Cobra Commander action figure in bright blue that's cloth turned into a real costume. This is like, oh, right. And then of course, the other comparison at the time, besides Marvel's Ultimate Comics line, was the Matrix trilogy. Because maybe while I'm saying this sentence, Mark, you can Google it. At some point around there, Warner Brothers announces and then makes two Matrix sequels, The Matrix Reloaded and The Matrix Revolutions. And the moment Devil's Due announces a second G.I. Joe comic that's more now and awesome and realistic, and it's called G.I. Joe Reloaded, I thought, oh, like The Matrix, right? Like, you can't call it Ultimate G.I. Joe. You can't call it Deluxe G.I. Joe, or no one thought to do that. You wouldn't call it Absolute G.I. Joe. Like, that term hadn't sort of, been used. You don't call it Super G.I. Joe, Maximum G.I. Joe. What's the adjective, right? Well, can G.I. Joe be first? Because then it's like alphabetically falls with all the other G.I. Joe things, right? Reloaded, there we go. And I remember, I think at the time I thought it's too obvious. They're too much grabbing onto that cool Matrix word.
Yeah. The Matrix Reloaded, the first of the sequels, came out in just 2003. So yeah, very much in the ether at that point in time.
Now, at this point, I utterly forgive Devil's Due if that was sort of derivative. It is a good name for a G.I. Joe story. It is a good name for a G.I. Joe relaunch. And more than any sort of latching on to the Matrix, it's a military word because you have a weapon and you run out of ammo and you reload it. So, great.
Yep. So while we're still on this particular cover, it also saw release as a black and white image as the G.I. Joe Cobra Reborn Special Edition Ashcan Preview, they called it, also featuring Voltron. So I believe this featured some black and white pages from the book for both Cobra Reborn as well as Voltron, and then some sort of text pages as well, like interviews and so on. I do not have this particular comic in my hands, so I can't be completely sure what's in there, but that's what it was described to that I could discover online. Right. And so in terms of the look of this particular costume, I was going to mention a couple of things. So in terms of this Cobra Commander redesign, it isn't completely from nowhere, because it is very much in line with the Cobra Commander design that they introduced a few issues in. I think in issue number 6 of G.I. Joe from Devil's Due, they introduced this design of Cobra Commander with this tunic with this kind of rectangular-ish shape on his front and the giant black shoulder pads. And they used this design then for about the next 20 issues or so. And so it's interesting that they've kind of almost reused it, but sort of added it, changed its aesthetic a little bit, added the leather coat, but the primary cue for this particular design that Bradstreet uses on the front cover seems to be this particular design.
Also, Mark, can you grab a picture of the 2002 Cobra Commander action figure? That was in the G.I. Joe versus Cobra 2-pack with Duke, because that is as much this Bradstreet take as this Mike Zeck one is. You're
talking about this quite chunky looking version.
Yes, but what I'm mostly pointing to is the giant Cobra symbol, not on Cobra Commander's forehead, but all the way over the face of his hood.
This one.
Yes. So he sort of has a jacket on top of his coat, but he's got this sort of exaggerated take on the mask.
Mm.
So we don't want to make it seem like if we were saying, if it sounded like a few minutes ago that this Cobra Commander costume, this Tim Bradstreet drawing on the cover, like this is the first time we'd ever seen a Cobra Commander look like this. That is not true, right? This had already been, these elements had already been in the mix, but it is still a different and striking take by this artist for this cover, and unusual that it's not an issue 1, it's a special, right? Even though it's technically an issue 1, but it doesn't have any Joes on it. It's just got the bad guy on the front and a couple bad guys on the back.
Then the other big toy connection is this Cobra Commander that was released in 2009, so inspired by the cover rather than the other way around. This was released by Sideshow. It was the second of their releases, and very much taking inspiration from this, I think, Tim Bradstreet cover, particularly with the leather sort of coat look to him.
Oh, with the shoulder pads. Yeah, do you have that? Is that behind you?
And over my shoulder, yeah, I've got it here. So I have got him there, sort of in a similar pose to as he appears on the front cover, and it's very nicely put together figure. Lots of sort of interchangeable parts. Got a little dagger with a scabbard that can come out, and the magazines in there, and a silencer that you can sort of take off.
The hood does not come off, right?
No, the hood is a plastic piece.
Okay,
yeah.
So unlike the first Hall of Fame Cobra Commander figure from, is it 1992, right? That black hood could come off, and underneath it was a Caucasian man with short brown hair, but a red Cobra mask over his nose and mouth.
Okay. The cover B was by Talent Caldwell, also doing, actually in terms of the sequencing, he introduces Wraith in the pages of the main title, but I think that would be after this. He's done a cover featuring Storm Shadow in that white outfit, which, as we say, was the first time that we saw Storm Shadow in a sort of a big white trench coat. Again, Matrix leanings and influences. A couple of characters in there with giant white trench coats and all that kind of jazz. Cobra Commander looming in the background, and then the Murderer's Row of Cobra talent, featuring behind Storm Shadow, Baroness, Firefly, Zartan, Destro, Major, Blood. And this cover was reused as a convention exclusive poster. And just while we're talking about covers as well, This is the front cover of the Reborn trade paperback, which collected the two specials, the Cobra and G.I. Joe Reborn specials, with a close-up of the Snake Eyes image that featured on G.I. Joe Reborn.
Interestingly, this trade paperback collection of these two kickoff specials has the two writer names on the front cover, but no artist names.
Mm-hmm.
And
Unusual,
that means that Devil's Due does not think that the artist names are going to help sell the book, or they would have put them on the cover.
Okay, yeah. So we can get on into the meat and potatoes of this particular issue. Let's do that with a plot breakdown.
Plot breakdown.
A mysterious leak of the Omega Black virus has killed several research scientists at the Center for Disease Control lab in Georgia. In Scotland, Cobra Commander crashes the party that James McCullen, aka Destro, and the Baroness are hosting. They are then recruited into Cobra with the promise of wealth and power. Likewise, Cobra Commander and Storm Shadow recruit Major Blood, Zartan, and Firefly. At the CIA headquarters, it is noted that 5 training camps in North Africa appear to be completely deserted. The only thing that remains is a depiction of an Arubos, pronunciation unknown, a snake that devours its own tail. Cobra unleashes a number of acts of terrorism: destruction of the Golden Gate Bridge, destruction of a computer company's main warehouse, the theft of the top-secret Avatar helicopter, and the assassination of a US senator. During a party at the White House, Zartan slips into the president's quarters and bugs his phone. Cobra Commander speaks to the president, rallies his troops with a stirring speech, and makes the presence of Cobra known to the world, displaying a Cobra sigil across TV screens. Tim, where would you like to start?
That final sentence of yours, Cobra Commander broadcasting to every TV, feels like the first couple episodes of the G.I. Joe cartoon from 1983, where Cobra Commander has the ability to just interrupt every broadcast, right? And there I think 2 sequences in the original 5-part Mass Device miniseries where the Joes in headquarters are looking at their giant computer screen, but also like random Russians in Red Square, and also some, I don't know, like New Yorkers on a street looking into a store window that's selling TVs, suddenly see Cobra Commander threatening all of Earth and democracy on every TV. So that's a fun. I'm sure Paul Jenkins is not referring back to the first episodes of the cartoon. Okay, here's where I want to start. I will admit it is hard for me to remember what I thought of this comic, because I think I only stuck with Reborn and Reloaded for 3 or 4 months. I was really excited that there was a second monthly G.I. Joe. We didn't quite say it, but we might have implied it. G.I. Joe Frontline ended, and I don't know that this book, the monthly Reloaded, literally replaced it, but in the sort of pipeline of how many books Devil's Due can make, or how many G.I. Joe monthlies the market will bear, right? The monthly G.I. Joe keeps going, Frontline ends. There are a bunch of, specials and G.I. Joe crossovers happening on the side, but there's a big push for this new, different second monthly. And I was really excited by the 2 covers, the Bradstreet covers, this renewed focus. If it was going to be sort of like The Matrix and sort of like Ultimate, great, right? Take my money. And I was ready, having bailed on the original Devil's Due G.I. Joe at around issue 10, because it didn't float my boat. I was ready to give Devil's Due a second chance. And here was a new continuity that they weren't like ruining what Larry Hama had done, or, not hiring Larry Hama to do more. And so I got the special, I got the next special, I got the monthly, but I didn't stick around for very long. So the Reloaded Pocket Universe does not take up a big space in my mind because it wasn't around for very long, and I was with it for even less time. And now in 2025, there have been so many additional G.I. Joe continuities that just lasted for, a year. There's the Tom Scioli Transformers G.I. Joe continuity. There's the Paul Allure World on Fire G.I. Joe continuity. And a lot of my mental space has been nicely taken up these last 2 years by the Energon universe. And we'll wait until the end, but there's a real comparison to be made here with this comic book, Cobra Reborn, and its take on Cobra starting from the ground up, and what Joshua Williamson and Dan Waters and others have done at Skybound, starting the Cobra portion of the Energon universe. So in broad strokes, I don't remember what I thought. I know I was excited. I think I thought this was a good comic. I think I thought this could have been, in terms of art and color, a better comic. But if you have listened to disavowed episodes of Talking Joe, folks, you know that I tend not to love art and color at Devil's Due between about 2001 and 2007. So maybe no surprise there. But I will say, before I hand the mic back to Mark, it's really exciting to hold a double-sized G.I. Joe special that is an all-new story and jumping on point. And I have this note on my notes. And it says, in my handwriting, it says, "No Joes." Not a single Joe appears in... Now, it's possible one or two of these guys at the CIA are walking down the hallway at the White House. Just some guy with like a jacket and tie and short brown hair is actually Hawk or someone. I don't think that is the case. It's very different and exciting that it's just the Cobra brass, and it's just a new origin for Cobra, but it's quite familiar. Mark?
Yeah, it's a good point. Well, maybe we'll follow up on it in a bit, but yeah, Cobra has come first, which might lead us to expect that maybe G.I. Joe is created as a reaction to Cobra specifically, rather than the first thing that we see. But yeah, in terms of my memory of this one, I've not reread it basically since it came out, I think. So memory is a little bit blurred, but my memory was that I was excited and intrigued to see this new continuity. I was delighted by the front cover for this and the second book by Bradstreet, because big fan of his work, and I thought that these two covers were up there with the greatest G.I. Joe covers there has ever been. Superlatives, and I think to some degree that is still true. These two covers for these first two specials are fantastic in my own opinion, and my recollection was that I really, really enjoyed this Cobra Reborn when it came out, and I thought it was a really great, powerful piece of writing and sort of setting up this world, but that I didn't quite as much enjoy the second special. And then I felt that the subsequent series didn't quite deliver on the promise that had been set up with the two specials. But we can talk about that further down the line. Coming back to it, all of these years later, I was really looking forward to it because I thought, I've been kind of slightly delaying the pleasure of this one, of not touching it, knowing that I thought quite highly of it from back in the day. And with that lofty expectation, I was a little bit disappointed that I didn't enjoy it quite as much as I was hoping to on my reread. As you say, part of that is the art not necessarily being anything completely special. Thinking about some of those other titles we've been comparing this to in terms of relaunches, there isn't that much in the art here that sets it apart from any other G.I. Joe titles that Devil's Due were putting out at the time. I like the ambition that they've got in terms of the setting up this world and the Cobra centric focus. But yeah, sort of seeing how Skybound have done it differently, it does give you pause to think about perhaps in hindsight how Devil's Due might have done it differently and what lessons they might have been able to learn had it been in an opposite order.
It's funny because we'll do this. We'll keep doing this comparison. The difference between Ultimate Spider-Man in 2000 and a lot of Spider-Man comics, Amazing Spider-Man and Sensational Spider-Man in the 90s and the 2000s and in the 60s when they started, the difference isn't that big. The difference between Ultimate X-Men and X-Men comics of the time was noticeable in every way. It's like a character was gay in the Ultimate Universe who had been straight in the regular universe, a character who was sort of nice and kind in the regular universe was like mean in the Ultimate X-Men continuity. I mean, certainly the first like 6 issues, the story moves really fast. Sentinels and like nukes and like the White House lawn and Magneto flying the stealth, the X-Men bomber. I forget. Got those issues in the other room. And Xavier's, I guess Xavier had always been a jerk. And then again, like the difference between the Ultimates, this new take on the Avengers in 2000, 2001, and what the Avengers was doing at the time was night and day. The difference between this comic and G.I. Joe comics at the time is night and early evening. And there is a different tone because we're much more concerned with sort of the nuts and bolts of a global conspiracy starting. And Cobra Commander is doing all this work himself, right? He's not sending his underlings to do it. He's going to Destro's castle. He's going to St. Louis to meet Zartan, and the American government and military apparatus, the CIA and the CDC and at the White House, they're 2 steps behind on all of this. They keep losing equipment and this virus, and they don't know what Cobra is. And in the Larry Hama and then Devil's Due sort of Josh Blaylock continued continuity, there are never any present day stories where we don't know what Cobra is. Cobra is a going concern in issue 1 of G.I. Joe in 1982. And when Devil's Due starts up in 2001, it's a continuation. So Cobra is still out there. So, we'd seen a version where Cobra sort of starts in that first Transformers crossover, but maybe effectively this is the first time we had sort of had a story where there is a world without Cobra.
Or a world without Joe.
And a world without Joe. Yes, very good.
Right.
I'm only thinking of Cobra in this story because the Joes aren't there, but exactly, the Joes aren't there. And again, this is another way that looks ahead to that first live action movie, right? Because the first live action movie is called something like G.I. Joe World Without G.I. Joe, Rise of Cobra, right? Like there is no Cobra yet. Cobra is starting. And I still think that's an excellent approach for a first G.I. Joe movie. I just don't like that first G.I. Joe movie. And okay, so even though there are a bunch of differences, there's this one major similarity, which is that Cobra Commander is this disaffected in flashback. There are 3 or so flashbacks where Cobra Commander in this Reborn special is revealed to be a car salesman who loses his family and feels betrayed by America and wants to take back his America or rule the world. And I was really struck by this because a question that I think we often ask when someone else writes G.I. Joe or there's a new take on G.I. Joe, whatever the continuity, are there Transformers or not? Is it the past or the present or the future? I feel like the unspoken question is always, has this other writer read G.I. Joe comics? Or more specifically, have they read Larry Hama stories? Or are they trying to refer to those or not? And, with the Skybound universe, Joshua Williamson, I think both reasonably and a little diplomatically sidesteps this, right? He keeps saying, my go-to is the file cards, which is a Larry Hama writing invention, but sort of, it's one step removed. Those aren't Larry Hama stories. Those are Larry Hama facts. And so I was really struck here that for all of the talk of, maybe Blaylock didn't say this, this is definitely on the front cover to Transformers Generation 2 issue number 1. This is not your father's Autobot. This is not your father's G.I. Joe. Although I guess in that Blaylock quote, this could be your father. And also your kid brother who's like 15 and cool in 2004. Anyway, for all the talk of this not being your father's G.I. Joe, there's a lot of familiar material.
Mm-hmm.
And this was the first time it had all been reset. So it felt really new and exciting. But I'm struck by the choice of, I'm assuming Paul Jenkins, to use this very specific Cobra Commander origin thread.
And in terms of, looking back to the original G.I. Joe, a lot of it came out, a lot of the backstory of like Cobra Commander came out very gradually. And we've still not seen necessarily huge swathes of sort of backstory for Cobra Commander or flashbacks beyond the odd sort of reference here or there, in the reference back to the him being a car salesman, and it feels like within this issue they've almost expanded that more than we've ever seen during the whole of ARA. So we get to understand a lot more of what Cobra Commander's backstory, what makes him tick, but then we also see Cobra being built out very rapidly. So within this story, he's sort of pre-established with Storm Shadow, but then he's recruited Destro and the Baroness, plus Major Blood, plus Zartan, plus Firefly. So he's right in there with his A-listers on the team. And in addition to that, it's established that he's got this, bio weapon that he's got his whole hands on basically page number 1, as well as recruiting an army. So he's at the outset got this giant hall full of saluting army and all of the branding that goes with it.
He's got a lot of banners. He's got banners. He's got several banners. Sorry, in Rise of Cobra, if you want to put a giant banner on the front of the White House, that's just CG. Okay, sorry.
So also it's sort of like, where have all of these troopers come from all of a sudden? So they talked about these Libyan terrorist training camps being empty. So that's, he's drawing, from recruiting like across the globe, these other terrorist cells into his army to sort of build a sort of pre-established army. And having spoken to Blaylock and listened to some of his interviews and so on, I think in terms of how he wanted to approach Cobra initially was to ground it a little bit more in the real world, and to that he'd sort of in issue number 1 been established that Cobra Commander had been away off the stage, and part of that was going out into the world and seeing other global terrorist organizations. And I think he wanted to do more of that, but there was a bit of a pushback from Hasbro. So I think this is to some degree a second bite at that concept of kind of trying to draw on some of more of that real world elements and building out his army from these like Libyan training camps, for example.
You made a point a minute ago that Cobra Commander already has Storm Shadow on his team, and there's just one little bit of dialogue which is interesting, where Cobra Commander says that Storm Shadow is loyal to him, whereas some of these other, I don't trust Destro, or do you trust Firefly. And so it's a given, it's taken for granted in these pages that Storm Shadow works for Cobra Commander and is loyal. And there's just a little bit of sort of demonstration of that Cobra Commander is taking him to all these places and showing him the progress. This is a reminder, I always forget this, that Storm Shadow is Cobra Commander's bodyguard, right? In sort of the earliest like concepting of like the animated cartoon and showing up in the comic, right? Like he's a Cobra ninja, but he's his bodyguard, right? Anyway, so But there's this line, I don't remember the page, about Storm Shadow, you're loyal to me. Loyalty works a certain way. Oh, here it is. Trust is like thank you. I'm looking at it right now. Trust is like a man's heart, Tommy, so easily broken. And that doesn't feel like setting up that Storm Shadow is going to betray Cobra Commander. That feels like making the comparison that Storm Shadow really is loyal, and it's these other people like Destro who may not be. And then Marcus just put a page on screen which has more of this flashback of car salesman Cobra Commander before, where his wife leaves him, and Cobra Commander is holding this wedding ring in the present day, and he says, "Instead, she betrayed me." So this point I was trying to make is that in this double length special, we get sort of nothing of Ninja. That Storm Shadow has a sword and can use it, but he's not doing any other ninja stuff. He's not sort of climbing a wall or creeping along a top ledge. He certainly doesn't attack other ninja or go back to Japan to ninja headquarters, and he doesn't refer to his heritage. So that is for later comics in this continuity, and the build out is instead the rest of Cobra Brass, and Jenkins goes down the line, right? So he pulls in Destro, and I feel like Jenkins is very much looking to the Destro file card, and I don't know, maybe some Larry Hama stories, maybe not. And a couple moments in this comic book feel like they look ahead to the first live action movie, G.I. Joe Rise of Cobra, where you have this flashback to a Destro ancestor, who's betrayed, and the reference to the mask, and then how Destro is going to punish someone now in the present day. And we just saw a version of this in the Energon Universe continuity, which is not to say that anyone is ripping anyone off. It's that, you tell a bunch of Batman stories, and sometimes a bat's going to fly through his window, and other times, he's going to get the idea in a cave, or, he's going to fall through a hole on his property, or whatever. Or maybe Alfred is just like a British agent and like a super soldier, and Bruce Wayne is very different. And then he brings in Major Blood, and he brings in, I wanted to talk about the Baroness, because for all the space that all these villains get, right? Each of the Cobra Brass gets a scene. Destro gets brought in, Major Blood gets brought in, Zartan gets brought in, great scene, and Firefly shows up. And Tomax and Zaymot make an sort of unannounced cameo, I think.
Oh.
On page 25. Just look for the guy with the scar who looks just like the other guy. It's the scene with Firefly in the parking garage. While you find that, I'll just talk about the Baroness. The Baroness is, unfortunately here, a bit of an afterthought. She is already in Destro's world. She's at his castle when Cobra Commander makes this surprise, unwelcome appearance. There's a masquerade. There's a costume ball, which is a really fun idea. I feel like the visual storytelling didn't sell it, because I think on page 6, the one that we're looking at right now, I think artist Eddie Barrows decided to make a very big panel of Cobra Commander's sort of first appearance here, his reveal in the rain up on the rampart, the parapet. And in the first two panels, you get very, very little space to show that people are drinking beverages, wearing tuxes and formal gowns, and also have masks. It's like it's like the size of 3 fingernails on the whole page,
which makes Destro wearing the mask seem much less odd with that context that other people are wearing masks.
Yes, that's good. So the fact that in this story he's punishing this man. Please, Mr. McMullen, if you have a heart, I have a wife, children, I want to see them again. When Destro puts on the mask, he is already wearing a tuxedo, and he says, kill the man. And then he walks out and then goes to his party. So that's really fun. That's a fun sort of writing device where Destro is so cold and calculating that he can, have this man beaten up and executed or ordered to be executed during his party downstairs from his party. And then he just walks out the door wearing his crazy mask and he just goes back to his party because he already had a tux on. I feel like that the scene needed one more page or a different arrangement of panels to sort of fully sell the idea. Anyway, so back to the Baroness. She's named, my dear Baroness. She's very, very small. And she's not doing anything that important. She just says, there's someone who wants to talk to you upstairs, James. And then it sort of happens again 2 more times in the comic where Cobra Commander has gathered his brass, and one of them is Destro, and the Baroness is there, and she gets to say sort of one thing or 2 things. And certainly, a double-sized special is more space than a regular-sized comic, but not a lot of space to introduce, the whole Cobra concept, Cobra Commander, 5 big Cobra characters, the US president and some sort of generic like American CDC and CIA and folks, right? So this is not me slamming Paul Jenkins, like he should have written this better so that the Baroness could be in. It's not that. But I do wish, considering how cool and important she is and how different she is, she's a woman, everyone else in the story is a man. She has a different take. And I wish somehow she could have been in this more.
Let's flick to Tomax and Zaymot, because I did completely miss this one on my read through. You've got 2 additional, let's call them bodyguards, I think, for Cobra Commander, in identical black suits. They very much look the same, slick back, kind of light brown hair, and one of them has got a scar across his eye. Against those context clues, you'd think it must be surely sort of hinted at that these are Tomax and Zaymot. That must be the suggestion. I think partly what I missed was that we've really just got that relatively small vertical kind of panel to go by. That every other time we see them, they are quite small and generic looking. And even in this particular panel, I don't know that necessarily the artist makes a big enough show that their faces are more identical than potentially other characters. Is it just that he draws people quite similar,
Yeah, so Tomax and Zaymot do appear on the 2 previous pages where the scene in this parking garage in Chicago starts. And we do see these 2 men, but as Mark just said, they're small, or we sort of only see one at a time. And I think on purpose, the one with the scar, we're not supposed to see has a scar until page 25. I think it's supposed to be, I don't know if it's an Easter egg. I think it's supposed to be just a small setup for future stuff and for established fans to say, oh, cool, there are more established Cobra characters here than I might realize. And I'm sure there'll be more in the story later. In terms of writing, I think this scene is neat because Paul Jenkins gives each of these Cobra characters who Cobra Commander recruits a different location, a different sort of technique, like how they're introduced, at a restaurant, in a parking garage, during a masquerade party, in his castle. And Firefly is in some ways the most dangerous because he gets is it a dagger? He gets a dagger right up to Cobra Commander's face and says, "It's a dangerous game you're playing. Your kind of ambition tends to attract notice. Give me one good reason I should be exposed by a buffoon like you." And Cobra Commander says, "I'll forgive this one time, but you have to join me." And then Firefly says, "I need time to think. I'll contact you when the time is right." Right? So whereas the other ones say, "I accept," or Zartan doesn't quite say, "I accept," but the implication is that he's going to join. I feel like Firefly, it's like 70-30 that he's going to join. And, maybe we won't see him for 5 issues. And that's fine because it's a pretty crowded field of bad guys. I'll say two more things about Firefly. While we're making still more comparisons to the live action movie, I feel like the slightly geared up version here of Firefly's costume, the way that we see it on page 23, that's the one before you're showing right now, Mark. I feel like maybe the costume designers on G.I. Joe Rise of Cobra saw this page and the next one and looked to it as much as, like the original action figure for the live action costume, sort of in like it is subtly more detailed than the original Ron Rudat costume. And we actually just saw a very nice photo of that costume because it was in that auction. And that costume has a crazy amount of cool and unnecessary detail all over it. And I feel like this is a little bit in that direction. So that's fun. Lastly, Firefly is black. Firefly is not a Caucasian guy. Now, of the 3 pages where he appears, he is colored black on 2 of them. And
one of them is not.
One of them, the one where he's actually got the dagger in Cobra Commander's face, the tiny, tiny bit of his skin that you can see around his eye under his mask is Caucasian. Going to chalk that up to a small coloring mistake. But the page before and the page after, he's definitely black, which is not the only time this has happened, but it is the first time this has happened in the IDW continuity when Firefly shows up in the Hearts and Minds miniseries. He's black. I mean, if we're talking about Ultimate Comics, right? The Marvel universe in the 60s is very white. And in the 70s, Black Panther shows up in 66 and then Luke Cage in the 70s and more after that. But when the Ultimate Universe shows up, an early idea was to have the Human Torch be black, and that was nixed. And instead, Nick Fury is drawn to look like Samuel L. Jackson. And now that's a total convention now, from 25 years of comics and 15 years of movies. So you have this change of race in a comic to add some variety. But Firefly does show up later in the Reloaded continuity, right?
I believe so. Yeah. I mean, my memory of the Reloaded continuity is very, very, very vague. So,
right.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to the reread to kind of rediscover it, really.
Right.
Speaking of these introductions, one of them that I found a little bit strange was the Zartan introduction, because it's set in this restaurant. There's this guy in a pulled up brown hood with sunglasses, face very much in shadow, talking to another guy in a wide brimmed hat, and so you're looking at this guy and I'm looking at this guy and thinking, okay, this is an interesting redesign of Zartan. He's wearing kind of a brown hoodie, like his original cowl. It's putting his face in shade, like that makeup. So yeah, interesting take on Zartan. But this character who looks very much Zartan-like is Cobra Commander in some sort of disguise rather than Zartan himself. Zartan is the waiter as we discover, and he hands a piece of paper saying appearances can be deceiving. What did you make of this, Tim?
The same thing that you did, that the guy who looks like Zartan is actually Cobra Commander, and that confused me for a page. And the guy who I wouldn't say looks like Cobra Commander, but doesn't look like Zartan, is actually a corpse, and he falls over. So what I like about this scene is the clever staging of the script, where there's this reveal that he's talking to this guy, but the guy's actually dead, and then he falls over dead into his food. Where it doesn't work is the costume and color cue you just pointed out. If the character who actually is Cobra Commander with the hood and the sunglasses, if that hood and trench coat had just been dark blue, not dark brown, I think a lot of confusion could have been avoided. Also, I think the art is crowded. I think the visual storytelling here, particularly on this one page these 2 pages we're looking at, where the guy dies falling into his food and Cobra Commander is sort of reacting, but it doesn't quite feel like that drawing of Cobra Commander is in the same panel as the guy who's falling forward. It sort of feels like a montage, like 2 panels have been combined, because you wouldn't turn like that if you're sitting in a booth. You used to sort of push yourself against the back of your booth. But the actual scripting, where it's the waiter who's Zartan, he's such a master of disguise that he's been there all along, but he's no one that we realized was in the scene. But even more so, he's such a deadly presence that he assassinated this person who Cobra Commander's been talking to for 2 minutes. And I don't know if he assassinated... Talking at. I don't know if Zartan, the waiter, killed this guy like 30 seconds ago. If we can sort of assume that the guy who sat down, who we were supposed to think is Zartan, if in the scene a minute before we joined the scene, if he walks in and sits down and then he gets killed, or he's just been sitting there the whole time and Cobra Commander sits down and says, "Okay, Zartan, we need to talk. This is what I have in mind. Why aren't you talking to me, Zartan? Zartan, Zartan?" And then Zartan, finger quotes, Zartan falls forward dead. I think the actual writing of the scene is great. I think the drawing of the scene is not great.
Yeah, I also wonder if there's meant to be any sort of intentional confusion created as well, because there's, the note given is appearances can be deceiving. Cobra Commander appears to look an awful lot like Zartan, but he's not. He's not Zartan either. He's Cobra Commander. Possibly intended to put us on the back foot a little bit.
I think that reads as error and is inadvertent.
And while we're talking about Zartan, let's talk about next appearance of Zartan, who disguised himself as Agent Smith, is it? Mr. Anderson, from talking about Matrix, as he sort of makes his way into the president's bedroom to bug his phone so that Cobra Commander can talk to him later. He's got some skills, that guy.
Yeah, this is pages 30 and 31, and I was actually confused by this because on 30 we see a young waiter inside with a serving tray saying, "Sure thing, Mr. Wilkins." And then we see him in a hallway and he's talking to Agent Smith from the Matrix, and he says, "Agent Smith," I'm reading that, "Agent Gravit, how's it going? I got to get some more food sent up." And Agent Gravit says, "Go ahead, Bobby." And then in the third panel, Bobby, this young waiter, is in the back outside, walking away from the building toward the dumpster. And there is no one else. And then the next panel, the one that has the curved top edge, Bobby, the young waiter, is dead on the garbage bags. And I didn't know if someone killed him between these 2 panels and he fell over dead, or if he's walking over and this is sort of what he sees, like himself dead on the pile of garbage bags. And then in the final panel on page 30, Agent Gravit, who I didn't actually realize was Zartan. I'm so dumb. Very good, Mark. Because I was sort of confused by the scene. Agent Gravit is holding his sports blazer, and behind him on the stairs is a white waiter jacket. I don't actually know the sequence here. Did Agent Gravit kill the young waiter, and in the final panel he's about to take his jacket off so he can disguise himself as the waiter? What is happening?
Yeah, the more I look at this one, the less sense it makes. I did think initially Zartan must be Bobby, the waiter, and that he's previously killed the real Bobby, and he's in disguise as Bobby. But then if he's outside by the presumably near the dumpsters again, where does the real Agent Gravit disguise come from? As he, and if he's trying to get past Agent Gravit, presumably he's previously got past him to be able to kill and disguise himself as Bobby to go back. So I'm a little bit lost as to quite what's going on here. I get the intent. He's a master of disguise. He's probably been Bobby. Now he's dressed as an agent and he's doing shenanigans to get up to the president's room. But exactly, the sequencing is a bit weird there.
Yeah, this needs one more panel. Maybe one of these 3 panels on page 30 that only has a single character in it needs a second character, like someone like dumping a body, or someone behind someone about to hit them and knock them out, or someone kneeling over someone and taking their jacket off so they can put it on. I don't have enough information on this page to actually follow the choreography of who is who and where they go. So page 30, I'm sorry, is a loss for me. Page 31, I can sort of pick up. Agent Gravit, who Mark says is Zartan, which makes sense. But see, here's the thing. I don't know if this is the real Agent Gravit and Zartan is pretending to be him, or if there's no real Agent Gravit and Zartan has like created an identity, Agent Gravit, with like fake credentials and has shown up. Now, the difference between those two doesn't matter for this story point, that Zartan sneaks into the president's bedroom and plants a bug on the phone. So it doesn't actually matter if Agent Gravit is a real person or not. But that does add to my questions about this comic. And, you know, I always go back to storytelling. You know, I can get animated about serifs on letters. You know, if the letter I has a little tick mark on the top and bottom of it, color that's too aggressive, like too many gradients, too many textures. Oh, speaking of textures, page 15. Let's talk about the mountains on page 15. When I finish this thought about storytelling, you know, I can get excited about like a very particular bit of inking on a cover for like underlighting or some texture, but you know, or, you know, is the art at the beginning of the comic as exciting as it is at the end? Did the person run out of steam or time? Did someone help them? Did the backgrounds drop out? But the core important thing is, can I follow the story? And by story, I mean the visuals of who is who and what they're doing. And on page 30, I cannot, and I'm sorry, Devils do, points off for that.
Let's continue with the story point first of all. So
President, you want to talk about President Bush?
Yeah. So he's in his bedroom.
Definitely President Bush.
His phone has been bugged. There's a call on one end of the line is Cobra Commander and the president picking up the phone. Yeah, as you say, that's definitely President Bush, President George W. Bush, the junior, that is picking up the phone. So they've gone for the real world president for this particular comic, which is always a comic choice, isn't it? It's like, do you go real president, imaginary president, bland, could be anyone president, or indications of a potential president, or do you just draw the guy?
So in like 1963, in an early issue of Spider-Man, Peter Parker is lamenting that he's less popular than Khrushchev. In the Ultimates in 2000 and 2001, the real president is the real president. I think Brian Hitch was drawing Bush. He certainly drew a couple celebrities of the day, because Tony Stark is dating, I forget who it was. It was like Freddie Prinze Jr.'s like girlfriend at the time. Like some actor from a movie that I didn't see in 2001 is actually drawn for one panel in that comic. And so in this sort of ultimizing of G.I. Joe, it's gonna be the real world.
Yeah. So let's go. And when I saw this page, I did think to myself, Tim's gonna highlight this page as being particularly egregious coloring on those there mountains that appear to be made out of some sort of shimmering metal or some such.
Okay, we're on page 15, so we're jumping back, and this is the Blue Ridge Mountains, Virginia. and Cobra Commander and Storm Shadow are looking at a base being constructed, and there are some mountains not very far in the distance. And unfortunately, what Lynx Studios and Transparency Digital have done here is taken a high resolution photograph of a rock, like a close up rock that's 12 inches from your face, and used that as the texture for these mountains, and not blurred it and not added any like shadows. And so the scale of it is off. Like if I took a photo, like a NASA photo of the moon, like the actual, dusty sand on the surface of the moon, and I'm not even going to finish this idea. Anyway, you can see it on page 15, right? It doesn't work. The only way this would work is if you like made it blurry, if you dulled it down, if you sort of shrank it and made it fuzzy, but then you don't have enough like actual like space to cover the whole thing without copying and pasting. It's just really distracting. And if you want to make a collage, if you want to do like an art project where you're doing like an image of a person and their hair is made out of like photos of spaghetti from a magazine ad, and their clothing is made out of like photos of grass, and their skin is made out of like photos of the ocean or whatever, the sky, like that's great. But you can't do it one time in a comic when it's this out of scale and out of place. And what this really wanted was just 3 or 4 or 5 colors in this sort of tan brown range. Let me look at my notes and see. Face's own death. Good. Why did I write that? That's 2 pages after the mountains. So what am I talking about on page 17? Oh, Fake's Fake's own death. I thought that was a really good addition from Paul Jenkins in adding something to the Cobra Commander mythology, seemingly from the Marvel run, that Hama has never referred to anything like this, right? Cobra Commander didn't fake his own death. And I just want to remind us, since we're talking about when stories have been published, the expansion of Cobra Commander's backstory in the regular Devil's Due continuity that is expanded from the Larry Hama Marvel continuity in Snake Eyes Declassified, that's 2006. So that has not happened yet. So when we're like, Paul Jenkins is doing this for the first time. Yes, Paul Jenkins is doing this for the first time. But I thought the scene where he, in the flashback, blows up his car dealership was great. Although, what a jerk I am. There are no cars. So it's just a little like cube of a building. It could be anything. But
yeah.
I thought the actual story point that in the eyes of the government, I died in an office fire that night, but I'd ceased to exist as a person long before that. I thought that was great because that gives a lot of coverage for Cobra Commander to now go do what he does. And, I've never like looked at Larry Hama stories and thought, like, shouldn't they know who he is? Or like, can't they track him down from, it's like, no, it doesn't matter. He's no one and everyone. He's just the forgotten American. So I thought this was a good version of it. I do think, okay, so I had said that there are no Joes here, but on page 18, there is a handsome, well-built guy with short brown hair who has a pistol holster, although it's sort of missing the actual holster.
On that page, yeah.
Just sort of looks like a decorative leather chest belt that you couldn't actually put a pistol. Anyway, and he's got a CIA badge. And in G.I. Joe iconography, my brain says, oh, this is Hawk. Because he gets half a page and he's sort of treated sort of neutrally. I mean, he's not like in front of an American flag and fireworks. He's sort of connected to the story, and he knows something. He knows what the symbol is, and he can, on the next page, define it for the president who doesn't know what it is. And that is Bush. That's another It's another pretty good attempt to draw photo reference of Bush. I think the word is pronounced Ouroboros. And folks, did you watch Millennium, the show that was not a spin-off of the X-Files, but that you could sort of squint and pretend it was? Also, there's an episode of the X-Files where Scully gets a tattoo of that symbol, although it's not related to the show Millennium. Anyway, the show Millennium with Lance Henriksen, remember this? The killer's still out there. Every episode. The symbol of the show was not a figure 8, but a circular snake eating itself. Okay. So that may be Hawk, it may not be. But it's definitely sort of an important generic American security character who's trying to connect the dots in a story where we're following Cobra and the good guys, the Americans and the government, are on their back heel. I was confused while we're talking about this page with It's Maybe Hawk, page 18. I was confused by the second panel. So this guy in the first panel, so it says, so me and Charlene is cooking when we hear this noise up above, pop, pop, like some kind of backfire, but real quick, one after the other. Heck, I know that sound. That's Aurora. It came across like a bullet and blew out our TV reception. I never expected to hear it so fast. Sorry. I never expected to hear it so far east. And in the second panel, while he's still talking, we see security footage of a plane. Panels 1 and 3. Okay, I get it. Panels 1 and 3 are the news. Panels 2 and 4 are this guy who might be Hawk,
CIA office,
watching a different security tape of like a sort of a stealth plane. Is the man on the street who's being interviewed, the man with the mustache in panel 1, does he know about this top secret jet and why? I couldn't follow this half page.
It's it's an odd one, isn't it? If it's that top secret, you wouldn't expect, because he's like presented as a bit of, a hick or something, isn't he? That it's why would he know about a top secret experimental plane? But it does seem to be written as a continuation of his dialogue from this news broadcast. So yeah, it's a bit of an oddity. Maybe it isn't quite as secret as we might expect.
I thought maybe the interview is with someone who lives near or works on a military base.
Maybe.
Like, if you live next to a military base and you're a civilian, you like own the Italian restaurant that's across the street from the base, you know when the jets are coming and going, even if you don't know which jets or about the top secret ones. And maybe you're sort of not supposed to talk about it, but no one has sworn you to secrecy. I thought maybe that's what this was. I don't have enough context clues. He's got a tiny bit of collar. He's got, sideburns and a mustache. There's a little bit of a, what's over the window? There's a little bit of a,
it's
awning.
Like a trailer or something. So like,
okay.
I guess that's the context clue. He's a local. He lives in a trailer. He's, me and Charlene is cooking, all of that. But okay, maybe he lives there, and maybe the experimental plane is local, and that's how he recognizes it. But the point of the dialogue is then that it's unusual that it's so far east, so it's away from where it should be. In which case, how does he recognize it if it's not in the place that it should be? A bit confusing. Anyway, let's get on to bigger things. So maybe let's take a step back and do some comparison of the success of this launch versus the Skybound. And the obvious comparison to make is how Skybound seems to be being very deliberate in terms of introducing its characters and spreading that out and not introducing people with a very deliberate fashion, such that they are there to serve the story at that specific point that they are introduced. Whereas here it's pop 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 pop. Here's the here's the top tier of Cobra all in one go, and it's not that it's throwaway, because most of those introductions are given at least a few pages each, and there is like, there is a bit of extrapolation as to why they are a significant character, being recruited, being putting together this gang. But it is a different approach to the approach being taken in the Skybound Energon universe, where we are introduced to basically just Cobra Commander initially, subsequently Destro, over the course of a 5-issue miniseries, and then Major Blood making significant impact, and then building on that with an arc of his own. We've not seen Firefly or Zartan at all at this point in time in the Energon universe. Tim, thoughts?
It's a very different amount of time. Here's I didn't count, but let's say 48 pages or 36, I don't know. At the time, this was, I think, unbelievable. That word might be too strong. This was really striking that you would spend a whole first issue, a whole special, a whole double-sized comic on just Cobra. And that had not been done before, right? We're still several years away from the Mike Costa, Christos Gage, Chuckles, the Cobra miniseries, and then ongoing that helps kick off G.I. Joe at IDW. So the big comparison, the unfair comparison, is that the breathing room that the Energon universe gets in introducing Cobra Commander across 5 issues and Destro across 5 whole issues. Now that there are 20 pages and not 22. Mark likes to point out that I like to point out that comics are a little shorter than they used to be. Although those first issues of the Energon universe were all 30 pages. But anyway, and this doesn't feel like, actually, for all of our comparisons with the Ultimate Universe, this G.I. Joe comic book does not feel like decompressed storytelling, right? When Mark Millar and Brian Hitch launched and then did every issue of 2 years worth of the Ultimates, there were a lot of splash pages, and there are a lot of pages with just 3 or 4 panels, and the panels tend to be wide and take up the whole tier, right? This is not like reading an Avengers comic in the 60s or the 90s, where it's got 6 to 9 panels and there's lots of dialogue and maybe lots of narration. As with all of the Blaylock and Brandon Jerwa G.I. Joe comics up to this point, there's a lot happening in here, and it does not feel like stretched out for the trade. It's not like cinematic with lots of wordless panels that look like movie stills, right? There's a lot of dialogue, there's a lot of action, there's a lot of characters, there's a lot of moving around, there's a lot of density. So part of the comparison is that the Energon universe, from the get-go, right, the pitch to Hasbro must have been 4 miniseries for G.I. Joe. 2 to introduce the bad guys, 2 to introduce the good guys, although we still don't know what's happening with the characters in the Scarlet corner of that universe. And so when I was reading this just now, I thought, this is kind of, the R word sounds really negative. This is kind of rushed, right? Maybe a fairer word is fast. This is pretty fast. We're getting Cobra Commander and Major Blood and Storm Shadow and Destro and Baroness and Firefly and Zartan all in one comic. But at the time, this was really different and really striking. And I can't find it, but before we did this episode, I found a discussion thread on either yojo.com or HissTank from the time, and someone, I don't know who it was, I think it was just someone on the internet. I don't know that it was like a Joe fan that we know, or someone who's been on the show. Some anonymous, some known unknown G.I. Joe fan in 2004 said, well, this is the greatest G.I. Joe Cobra story ever told. And I thought, right, I think that's how a lot of fans who read this comic at the time felt. And so I want to put myself in my 2004 shoes and not compare this to the really nice art and color and lettering and production design and writing of all these Skybound comics, right? Where they've had more time and they started from out of the gate as a big hit, right? By the time Devil's Due is getting this ready, Devil's Due has already peaked in terms of sales. Sales are only dipping 3 years into Devil's Due, 2 or 3 years into Devil's Due on G.I. Joe. And so I don't know if, the writer and the cover artist were very expensive and the artist and the colorist weren't. That's not fair. But this does feel like a very good middle ground between the exciting relaunch with some name talent and also, getting some bang for the buck. Because it is fair to say that Lynx Studios was not the highest profile coloring studio in comics back in 2004, right? I have not heard of them, right? This isn't like Liquid. This isn't Hi-Fi. This isn't like Richard Isanove, who, was doing Marvel covers at the time. So I do have a kernel of a memory from the time of reading this and thinking that this was a really good take on Cobra. And I probably thought something cynical like, well, I don't like where G.I. Joe is at issue, 25, 26, 27. If that was to just go away and this was to replace it, even though technically that other one is still the Larry Hama continuity and this isn't, I would be satisfied because this is more my flavor. This is like a mixture of things that feel like 80s G.I. Joe, Cobra Commander, the car salesman, and also a very modern take with, bioweapons and assassinations and Cobra as this giant global conspiracy that Paul Jenkins is grounding and trying to explain. Like one of the things that's sort of never been fun about the cartoon is that, Cobra has an origin in the animated movie, but we're still missing a step. How did Cobra Commander find Destro and recruit all these people and have someone sew all these blue uniforms and build all these terrordromes and etc., right? And we have a little of that in the Larry Hama story, and we have a little bit more here. And that's very satisfying.
Good. We're sort of into wrap up conclusion mode. Similar sort of thought process to you. I enjoyed it very much at the time. Have not read it again since, so rediscovering it. I think the story is strong. Definitely different to what's going on in the equivalent book back in the disavowed continuity being written by Joe, and this issue definitely does sort of leave me intrigued as to where the story is going and wanting to sort of pick up. We've got this giant threat established. What on earth is going to happen next, and how is G.I. Joe going to respond, and what is this equivalent modern take on G.I. Joe going to be? By slightly disappointed that it didn't necessarily live up to my expectations of my own memories of the book for sort of all of these years on, and looking at it just sort of slightly disappointed perhaps that maybe there wasn't as strong a marquee name for the artist on the book, but appreciate that Devil's Due did not have an unlimited budget, but generally I'm left with positive feelings about this book and enjoyed it. As you say, I think they did a lot with the Cobra Commander backstory, sort of touching on the Marvel continuity, but also building on it in a way that felt consistent with what that character was all about.
We didn't talk about the 2-page montage. Cobra Commander is narrating to Destro as in California, a building is on fire, and at Andrews Air Force Base, some helicopters go missing. And in Georgia, a senator dies in a car accident. And then in Washington, I feel like we've maybe missed a sentence or two that Jenkins really does have Cobra Commander trying to explain for Destro and for the reader how this would work and that it's been in motion for a long time, right? A US senator dies and nobody notices.
I think you thinking of maybe the next couple of pages onwards where he's talking about what you've manipulated a few key events. What does it all mean?
Thank you. Yes.
The computer software company sells to its competitor, and Cobra finances itself for another year on legitimate profits made by the sale of the competitor's stocks. A very influential billionaire who just happens to be on our payroll owns the competitor. And then he's talking about replacing the dead senator as has happened for 13 in the last 10 years. Yeah,
the dead senator will be succeeded by one of my own men, as have 13 in the last 10 years. We've wrested the power from our own government, my dear Destro. Cobra now has a silent majority on Capitol Hill. That is really thoughtful writing and works better than the Cobra takeover of the White House in Rise of Cobra, right? Which, with Zartan as the president, had a good start, but it doesn't work, and works better than Larry Hama having Cobra take over the White House in issue 156 through maybe 160 of the IDW continuation in 2010. And it's chilling that even though Cobra Commander showing up and recruiting Zartan and Destro and all these guys now in the present day in this comic, he's seeded so much already. He's been working on this for so long. And it's Paul Jenkins could sort of wave his hand and say, no, yeah, he already did a bunch of this, right? Like that's a fun writer trick that I don't ever think to do. And I don't write fiction, so I don't ever think to do this. But because Cobra Commander in Paul Jenkins' hands has been working so long, building up people and bases and weapons and armament, and now finding very specific sort of top brass, you do buy it. It doesn't feel like a cheat when Paul Jenkins has Cobra Commander say, oh, this senator who just died, that's step 17. Just in terms of senators and Congress people. I've already been working this. And that's sort of the most interesting line in the whole comic to me. And it's just a thing that Cobra Commander says in between, like giving a speech to his soldiers and then them all pumping their fists with the giant banner, behind him as he's up on a dais, because it shows how complete the state capture is. And I think maybe I've always wanted more of this kind of long-term and distant past manipulation. And I like Larry Hama's take on Cobra a lot, but in some other episodes of Talking Joe, you and I have noted that there's an awful lot of Cobra Commander like talking to Dr. Mindbender, and then Dr. Mindbender trying to get the brainwave scanner working again. It's like, no, other stuff, some other stuff too, like kill a senator, or remember that senator that you took over with the brainwave scanner? I think they forgot. I think that's my favorite line in the book, and speaks to the menace of Cobra that is very much sort of charged and believable here. I do want to I know we've sort of done our wrap up thoughts, but I just want to point out that in this scene at the end where the banner unfurls, Cobra Commander is giving this speech. He's talking to Destro and then he gives the speech. And on pages 32 and 33, it feels like, and I don't know if this is still Eddie Barrows because the art's pretty rough at the end of the book. It's like, no, just show the Cobra symbol. Like the bottom half of page 32, it's like this giant banner is unfurling and we don't see the Cobra symbol. And then on page 33, the Cobra banner has been unfurled and it's like 1/3 cropped out. And I couldn't tell if in the plot, in the script, Jenkins is telling his artists, don't show the Cobra symbol until sort of a particular moment when it has all finally built. But then on page 34, sort of we do see it on the front of the dais, but also different artists are definitely drawing this because the Cobra symbol looks very different at the beginning and the end of the scene.
Yeah, flicking those 2 pages. Yeah.
I sort of wondered if the reveal, it's like we're kind of not supposed to see a full unobstructed Cobra symbol until the final panel of the entire comic book, when it's just a close-up of the TV in the president's room. And I like the idea of this, but it sort of doesn't work because in the panel before it, you see 85%, this is on the last page, of the Cobra symbol, and it's just a little bit blocked by the president's arm, which is, I'm sorry, cropped very badly from behind his torso. And you see like the bottoms of it on the previous 2 panels. Okay, and then, so whether it is actually intended to be this final reveal of the full Cobra insignia or not. And also we keep seeing it on Cobra Commander's mask. So if the reveal is being withheld until the end of the story, it's being undercut every time we see Cobra Commander. So what maybe should have happened is during the speech at the end, he puts on this new version of his mask, which is blue and has a red thing on it. And up until now, he hasn't had the red part in it. But anyway, the final 3 pages, I think in terms of writing work, in terms of visual storytelling, don't. The ending of the book fizzles. And I sort of see what everyone's trying to do. And I tell myself, oh, this is good. But the actual ending is a little disappointing because, 3 pages from the end, the panel where the president is grabbing the phone. It's an awkward panel, sort of mixing like reference of Bush with a drawing of a hand and a phone. It's sort of like, is he coming up from a manhole cover? Like in the floor? Like, is he in bed? I sort of don't believe the angle of how he's sitting or lying and reaching for the phone. And then there's this giant Cobra Commander head. And I don't know why it needs to be that big. And then the next 2 pages, it's a giant TV. And then, okay, on the final page, we're at some newspaper somewhere. And like Jimmy Olsen's older brother runs in and tells Perry White, yo, Charlie, come and take a look at this. It's like, where are we? We're just in some office or we're at a newspaper. And this is the kind of thing where if this was a movie, you could cut and have more cues, like sounds in the background that say it's one kind of office or another, or have a quick like camera move from like one specific piece of equipment that says this is a newspaper office, or like an investment firm, or it's the stock market, right? And the camera like zip pans over to these 2 people. Yo, Charlie, come and take a look at this. And then we cut to somewhere outside. And I don't know if this is, like Times Square or like Red Square. Speaking of random Russians in the first episodes of the animated G.I. Joe, seeing Cobra Commander's televised threat. And so I feel like when you do this in a montage in a movie or a TV show, you can build it up a lot more. Like, oh, I know that actual, like, what's the one in London? Is it Piccadilly?
Piccadilly Circus, yeah.
Is that the one, like, movies always cut to that and it's got a bunch of, it's like your Times Square and it's got a bunch of light up things. I was there once. And but to have a like good artist cram this into one panel on the last page, and then I know we're supposed to feel like the president has been totally cowed. The final 2 panels just don't show that enough. And some of it's because I don't really buy that second to last panel is actually, the president. It just looks like a guy in bed. It doesn't feel like the White House's bedroom, like where's the first lady? So the final 3 panels the final 3 pages, I like the scripting. I think it sort of runs out of steam in terms of art and space. And even though there's a lot of power in ending on the symbol, and it doesn't have to be like a bomb goes off. We've already done that. And good news, wasn't the G.I. Joe Reborn special? Wasn't that just like 2 weeks later?
Yeah, certainly not long after. This was January, and Reborn was February. So,
and then Reloaded 1 is March. So maybe it is a
Yes.
full four-week cycle.
yeah, but boom, 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 1, 2,
You know
3.
what? I'm getting mixed up. I'm remembering when the final issue 44 by Brandon Jurwa came out, and then just a week or two later is it issue 0, the 25-cent issue by Joe Casey of America's Elite came out. That's what I want to be happening with Reborn and Reborn leading into Reloaded. For all of my tough talk about the arts in this book, Eddie Barrows has become an extraordinary comics artist. And I don't mean in 2025. His stuff is particularly extraordinary now, but it's been extraordinary for a while. So part of me looking back at this and thinking, this is only okay, is like, well, Devil's Due hired a lot of new and young talent because that's who they could get. But I can sort of appreciate that, although I don't love the art in this book, in order for this artist to be much, much better 10, 20 years later, he had to start somewhere. The same way that, at the time I didn't like Steve Kurth's art on the first issues of G.I. Joe, and I still don't like those pages. But years later, Steve Kurth came back and drew some G.I. Joe comics that were great. So had to start somewhere.
Indeed. So hopefully we've got a nice surprise lined up as a follow-up around this, which I won't say out loud and jinx, but we will be back before too very long in this universe talking about G.I. Joe Reborn and then also G.I. Joe Reloaded. So if you're reading along, keeping track, dig out those issues, have a read through before we get to cover them. Then, of course, we will be covering all of the latest issues from Skybound as they come out. If you're new to Talking Joe, you want to find out more about us, we are at talkingjoe.co.uk. That is the website that points to all the places we can be found, which include our Patreon site, patreon.com/talkingjoe. So a big thanks to Richard, Sam, Bill, Justin, Rob, Shane, Simon, Chris, Joe, Craig, Frank, Mike, D, Shane V2. This version has big shoulder pads, Tim. Infinite Entertainment, Patrick, and Gary V. They are all getting early access to content like this episode, as well as some exclusive content. Tim, where can you be found when you are not talking to me about comics from 21 years ago?
My partners and I have a YouTube channel which features funny and smart video essays on television and film called Atomic Abe. Find that at YouTube. I own a comic book store, Hub Comics, that's in Somerville, Massachusetts. Somerville borders Cambridge and Medford and Boston. And I write about G.I. Joe at my blog, realamericanbook.com.
Very good. So I think we are done. But as we go, just leave us with a little reminder, Tim.
Nobody Be Talking Joe, an international podcast.
Laters and hail Cobra.